Alright, so Common Core Algebra 1, here we are with solving a quadratic equation. Now we're going to be using something called the quadratic formula. So we've done factoring before with the zero product property. Now we're going to apply the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation, which, one more time, reminding you, quadratic equation is going to have some sort of x squared term, whether that number in front is a 1 or some other number. Quadratic formula, very important that you write this down. We read this: x equals negative b, the symbol is plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. The whole thing over, this should actually be 2a. And we're going to use this in order to solve a quadratic equation for all values of x, because sometimes there will be equations that are not factorable, and therefore we couldn't do the zero product property, but we can always do the quadratic equation. Again, a reminder, we can have 2, 1, or 0 solutions in a quadratic equation. And we'll talk a little bit more about when we have 0 solutions with this stuff than we did on the factoring stuff. Okay, so to use the quadratic formula, what you're going to need to do first is identify your a, b, and c and plug those values in. So you're going to substitute in numbers for a, b, and c on that formula that we just talked about. And then you're going to simplify under the square root and the denominator first. So big thing here is that before you do anything else, you work with the numbers under the square root and the denominator. And then we're going to separate the plus or minus into 2 solutions. So this is where we get our 2 solutions. One we're going to have plus in between, one we're going to have minus in between. And then we finally simply simplify both of those solutions. Keep it in mind, you need to simplify your numerator completely, then divide. So one common mistake there is we make mistakes with our calculators. It is absolutely essential that we bring in a calculator to class for this stuff. Looking at an example here, a is always the number in front of x squared. Remember, we don't want x squared, we just want the number. B is the number in front of x. Again, we don't want x, we just want the number. And so c is 8. Looking at your notes while we go through this, so here we want a negative b. B is 9 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, the whole thing over 2a. So we plug each one of those in. And now we also then said substitute under the square root and the denominator first. So if I substitute under my square root, I'm going to have x equals, and also another big thing here, we have that division symbol under the entire numerator, not just the square root piece. So negative 9 plus or minus, if I plug in all this information into a calculator, 9 squared minus 4 times negative 6 times 8, we're going to get the square root of 273. All over our denominator, 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. And then we can go to our calculators and simplify the square root of 273. So I'll have x equals negative 9 plus or minus, and if we plug that into the calculator, we get about 16.5 all over negative 12. And now our last step, we need to separate our roots. So we're going to have one where it's negative 9 plus 16.5 over negative 12, and the other one where it's negative 9 minus 16.5 over negative 12. I mentioned you need to keep an eye on your order of operations. So it's a lot like thinking that there are parentheses here around that numerator. So we're going to do negative 9 plus 16.5 first, then divide by negative 12, and you should get a negative 0.625 or negative 0.63 would be fine. If we do this here first, negative 9 minus 16.5, then divide by negative 12, we're going to get 2.125. And that would be how we plug in, and you see we get 2 solutions here. Okay, we have also talked about factoring and lots of different types of factoring. So we've talked about the greatest common factor. You always want to look for that first. Then we did trinomials when a was equal to 1. That, remember, was just the factors of c. So they multiply to get c and add to equal b. When that was the case, we just wrote our answer as 2 binomials equals 0, and then we did a zero product property to separate those. We also did trinomials or quadratics when a was not 1. In that case, we needed to do AC, and so we found numbers that multiply to get AC, and then we separated that into 4 solutions, or 4 terms, based on things that added to equal B. Okay, that is it for the quadratic formula. Just one example problem there, really just paying attention to signs and order of operations and making sure you have a calculator. If you do all those things, then you will have 0 problems with this chapter, and it should be pretty easy for you. Just make sure you're bringing that stuff. All right, bye.